Week 7 is in the books, and that means it's time to hit those waiver wires to find players that could add value to the back end of your rosters. And quick note, I am going to be referencing rostership percentages in this video, and there's a coming from roster data from 1,700 Dynasty Leagues on myfantasyleague.com. Basically a 50-50 split of one quarterback in Superflex, all with a minimum of 20-man rosters. So I'm not pulling these guys out of nowhere, but it is possible that some or even all of these guys are already rostered in your leagues. But for the most part, there are hundreds of Dynasty Leagues out there where these guys are on waivers right now. First and foremost, I want to highlight a couple players that are highly rostered, but they're not exactly 100% rostered that I think need to be, and that includes Malik Willis and Will Levis, both quarterbacks for the Tennessee Titans, Aiden O'Connell, quarterback for the Vegas Raiders, Gardner Minshew, quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, Jordan Mason, running back for the San Francisco 49ers, Kendrick Bourne, wide receiver for the New England Patriots, Terrace Marshall, wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers, and Cade Otton, tight end for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, all guys that are rostered in over 95% of Dynasty Leagues out there, but not exactly 100%. So double check your waiver wires and immediately add these guys if they are available. All right, now we got some clarity on the Rams backfield situation without Kyren Williams now, which is a 60-40 committee between Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman. No one else was involved in any way, shape, or form. Both running backs actually produced pretty well against the Steelers. Henderson led the way with 61 yards and a touchdown on 18 carries, plus he had a couple of targets, and Freeman tallied 66 yards on 12 carries as well, so a little bit more efficient, but not as much volume as Darrell Henderson. This should be the projected usage for this backfield for the next 3 weeks with Kyren Williams on the injured reserve. So if you're able to pick up either back, specifically Darrell Henderson, you could possibly be adding a top 20 running back through the middle of November, which could be massive for some of you contending teams out there that are desperately in need of a running back. But even if you are rebuilding, don't be afraid to pick up one of these guys to use as trade bait for potentially free draft picks from desperate contenders. If you can get a couple of thirds or even a second round pick off of a contender for one of these players, it's well worth it if you can add them, even as a rebuilder. All right. I don't know what to say here. I have no idea why Bijan Robinson only had 1 touch this week. I have no idea why Tyler Algier had 21 carries while rushing for under 3 yards a carry. And I especially have no idea why Cordarrelle Patterson had 10 carries in this game. Arthur Smith just hates fantasy football, I guess. Now, I'm not saying this to advise adding Cordarrelle Patterson to potentially go in your lineup because Bijan Robinson's in the doghouse or he's hurt or whatever have you, but I would recommend adding Cordarrelle Patterson as a potential handcuff down the stretch. We have seen how typically both Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier have both been viable simultaneously in the same game. So if either running back were to get hurt and miss an extended period of time at any point during the rest of the season, Cordarrelle Patterson would then go into that RB1B role potentially and could have flex consideration at some point during the year. So I guess this is where we're at in the 2023 fantasy season. If you want to add Cordarrelle Patterson, go for it. But while we're on the topic of questionable running back usage, Chris Rodriguez actually saw 7 carries for 31 yards against the New York Giants. Now, some of you may not have even heard of Chris Rodriguez before today. He's a 6th-round rookie running back out of Kentucky with power running back size at 5'11", 224 pounds. The reason why this usage was odd was because the Commanders were in a neutral game script all game long against the Giants, and there was no indication of injuries for either Brian Robinson or Antonio Gibson. So I guess the assumption is that Ron Rivera just likes Chris Rodriguez in certain situations during games, and he was the most effective running back for Washington this week. And I think furthermore, given Ron Rivera's just apparent resentment toward Antonio Gibson, we could also assume that Chris Rodriguez is the primary handcuff to Brian Robinson and would take over his role if Robinson were to get hurt at any point in time and Antonio Gibson stays in his complementary / pass catching role in this offense. And again, just while we're on the topic of adding handcuffs, let me just generalize this part by saying add all of the handcuff running backs that are available on waivers right now. We've already seen how important it is to roster these guys this season with Jerome Ford, Gus Edwards, Zach Moss. I mean, technically guys like Raheem Mostert and Kyren Williams were more considered handcuffs prior to the season starting as well. And look how amazing they've been so far. And it doesn't really matter if you're competing or rebuilding. You should be rostering handcuffs regardless. If you're competing, they can give you a spot start with RB2 production, help you win a week, and go towards a championship. If you're rebuilding, you can flip them for a couple of thirds, maybe even a second rounder to a team that is desperate for points. So you definitely want to be adding these guys onto your team if they're available on waivers. And to give you some specific names that could be available in your league, and I'm going to order these in my priority order as well, I'm looking at guys like Amari Demarcado, Craig Reynolds, Latavius Murray, Chase Brown, Rico Dowdle, Zamir White, Michael Carter, and Sean Tucker. These would all be guys that I would be looking for on waivers and adding right now if they are available. Now, last week, I touched on Tyquan Thornton as a potential receiver add for this muddy Patriots receiving core to see if he could separate himself from the rest of the guys there. But this week, I want to also mention Demario Douglas, who caught 4 receptions for 54 yards this week on 6 targets. He also added a 20-yard rush in this game as well. And this isn't the first good game that Douglas has had this season. He also had 7 targets in week 1. He had another 40-yard game in week 4. And he hasn't done anything really spectacular, but he's an interesting name as a deep stash in very deep leagues, and actually has similar production to players like Darnell Mooney, Rashad Bateman, Alec Pierce, and Sky Moore, which I know are not the sexiest names right now, but all 4 of those guys are rostered in 100% of MFL leagues right now. Demario Douglas is not, yet his production is comparable to those 4 in an offense in a situation where he could get an expanded role that those other 4 really can't. Now, the last name that I want to mention is Leonard Fournette, who has somehow gone unsigned even after all the running back injuries that we've had so far this season, but that could change the closer that we get to the trade deadline and the end of the NFL season as teams start to gear up for their actual playoffs. Now, Fournette did also tweet that he's going to be announcing where he will sign next week on his Kick channel or whatever, which I'm still not even sure is about football and could be about gaming, since he has all these like Call of Duty clips on his Twitter right now.
Let's go, man.
Dubskis!
Come on, bud.
But hey, maybe he does sign somewhere in a week or 2 and you just beat the waiver wire rush to go and get him, since he's still available in a decent number of Dynasty leagues out there right now that you could either use for if he actually has production, or you could just flip on the hype right after he signs anyway. So again, another guy that if you have an extra roster spot and he is available, Leonard Fournette, not the worst pickup right now. But if you're a Dynasty football player and you're not subscribed to this channel, please do so, as we're going to be dropping Dynasty specific content all season long. And if you haven't watched it yet, I made a video talking through a few Dynasty buy lows right now, which you guys can check out right up here.